What are some simple yet incredibly disturbing/scary facts? Story 1. Moving back the start time for school in an area resulted in 70% less car accidents. Similarly, at each daylight saving, heart attacks and accidents decrease with an hour of extra sleep and increase with an hour less of sleep. Sleep is crazy important. I believe it. Our school district switched start times this year so the younger kids would have to be to school at 7:30, and then they scheduled spring break for the week before DST so that the first week back to school after jumping ahead was absolute hell. Story 2. This is the last time we will interact ever. From here on out, you and I will not cross paths with a 99.99% likelihood. I really hope you do well and make the best of things while you are alive. Story 3. NASA simulated the response effort to a killer asteroid and determined they would need a minimum of 5 years' notice to have any chance of deflecting it. More realistically, 10. We'd basically have to identify the thing leaving the Kuiper Belt. Just before this becomes an Elon Musk proxy war, this study is about 5 years old, but they just threw the kitchen sink at it, meaning they envisioned a utopia where all humanity sets aside its differences and dedicates all resources, including nukes, to deflection, and it still wasn't enough. So perhaps SpaceX rockets will get there faster, but all that means is that we will fail sooner. Let's hope we get some encouraging data from DART. Story 4. I don't think this is exactly simple, took me a bit to wrap my mind around it, but there is a valid reason why looking at your reflection for too long or in dim lighting makes you uncomfortable: the Troxler effect, a phenomenon where if you stare at a point long enough, the surrounding details of the stimulus fade away as unimportant. Coupled with our brain's natural impulse to find faces in things, if you stare into your reflection long enough, peripheral details of your face, forehead, chin, ears, jaw, etc., will become muddled to the point where even though you will recognize that the face in the mirror is in fact a face, your brain will tell you it's not yours. Story 5. When he was younger and in Scouts, my uncle learned all of his troop leaders' favorite knots. His troop leader was Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, who told all the boys how extremely useful it is to be able to tie very strong knots. My mom used to do ultrasounds in prisons, and she has scanned that dude before. She said he completely owned up to everything he did, and seemed like he showed no remorse about it. But other than that, he seemed very normal, probably how he was able to go unidentified for so long. Story 6. Body integrity disorder. The PubMed.gov website describes it as the extremely rare phenomenon of persons who desire the amputation of one or more healthy limbs or who desire a paralysis. Adding, some of these persons mutilate themselves, others ask surgeons for an amputation or for the transection of their spinal cord. Psychologists and physicians explain this phenomenon in quite different ways, but a successful psychotherapeutic or pharmaceutical therapy is not known. Story 7. Every time you move your eyes from one spot to another, you go blind for the instant your eyes are moving. It's called saccadic masking. It's an evolutionary trait to stop us from getting motion sick. Your brain fills in the blank spot with whatever you end up looking at and context clues. It's why when you first look at a clock, the second hand seems to take longer to click the first time. Story 8. Despite literally all war propaganda from every country saying otherwise, you are not going to make an individual impact in glorious battle and die valiantly in the hail of hostile bullets. Statistically, you are overwhelmingly more likely to be killed by an explosive device launched miles away by a vehicle you will never see, long before you ever get the chance to pull the trigger. Which, relatively, is such a new human experience. To quote Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, I am fascinated by the extremes of the human experience. It used to be that a single, well-trained, well-armed soldier on a battlefield who was physically imposing could single-handedly turn the tide of a battle. The Romans used to fear the Gallic tribes to the north because while the average Roman soldier was around 5'3" to 5'5", the average Gallic warrior was more like 5'10" to 6 foot. That used to mean something, everything. I mean, I myself am 5'8". And I sure as hell wouldn't want to fight hand-to-hand combat with someone 6 inches taller and at least 30 pounds heavier than me if I was given the choice. In the modern era, it means jack shit. A 6 foot 200-pound soldier goes down to bullets and artillery all the same as his 5'6" comrades. Infantry combat from the American Civil War onward is just a glorified meat grinder. The winning side is the one with the most expendable soldiers, and no individual can change that anymore, at least not on a battlefield. Today, it's more about the technology than ever before, since the most technologically advanced countries are nearing being able to fight and win a war without ever having any actual boots on the ground. It's fascinating how far we've come in just a couple thousand years. Story 9. 1. Cone snails can sting without warning. You may not be able to feel the sting immediately. There is no antivenom for a cone snail's sting, and the only treatment available is to keep the victim alive until the toxin wears off. 2. Since 2007, at least 20 detached human feet have washed up on the coasts of the Salish Sea. 3. When underwater, the blobfish looks like any other fish, but because it lives deep in the ocean where the pressure is intense, it does not have a swim bladder to keep it buoyant. Moreover, it does not have a skeleton or muscles, which is why it becomes saggy and droopy when taken out of the water. 4. Once you begin displaying symptoms of rabies, you will die. There is no cure, and you can go crazy and experience intense pain until you die. 5. The tongue-eating louse is a parasite that severs the blood vessels in a fish's tongue, causing the tongue to fall off. It then acts as the fish's tongue, replacing an entire organ. Story 10. Because of the way atoms are, if you slam your hand down on a table, there's a chance, an infinitely tiny chance, like 0.000000001 in 1 billion times 10 to the power of a trillion, so just slightly less than winning the lottery, that your hand will pass through it. My physics professor at college ran out of room to put the numbers, but apparently it is something about the way atoms are arranged and the amount of space, as it were, inside them. That man was oddly passionate. Story 11. We don't fully understand how anesthesia works. Obviously, one theory is that it knocks you out and you don't feel the pain. The other theory is it prevents you from generating any memories of the pain you experience. The theory makes sense to me as I woke up during a wisdom tooth removal and screamed, then went under again. I have no memory of waking up at any time during the surgery. This is what I was told. This is 100% true. We know the biological response is an indicative observation, but it is not fully understood at all. You don't remember anything because we use ketamine regularly in oral surgery, along with midazolam, and retrograde amnesia is a bonus for the purpose of you not remembering if the sedation got a little light. Story 12. The leap in technology, advancement from us to a race that could actually traverse the galaxy/universe, is astronomically ludicrous. We are absolutely nothing in comparison to any race that has created ways to reach us, meaning any race capable of finding us would be so advanced and so much more knowledgeable than us that they could observe us without us ever knowing. They would have technologies, weapons, etc. outside our realm of understanding and would be able to annihilate us with ease, just given the fact that their ability to generate/harness power would be unparalleled. If any alien ever came to Earth with hostile tendencies, short of a miracle, we'd be doomed. Story 13. Sight is pretty disturbing when you think about it. Everything you see around you is actually just a projection of the inside of your eyeballs and the interpretation by your brain. Even if you see something right in front of you, there is no certainty it is actually there. You're basically viewing a giant round cinema screen, which your brain believes is the actual world. Moreover, while we see things as having color, that's also just our perception. Objectively speaking, color as we see it is not innate and real. Properties resulting in wavelength and the like are real, to course, but yellow-looking yellow is just a product of our brains. Story 14. Alien hand syndrome is a neurological condition where a person's hand, and sometimes a leg, will move on its own independent of the person's will because of isolated activities in the contralateral primary motor area. It has sometimes led to the injury of the hand's owner or of others in close proximity. Let that sink in. A person's hand moves with a mind of its own. Story 15. Here is one I learned last month. So, one of my colleagues who was a history teacher was talking to another member of staff about World War II in the break room. The Japanese had an operation planned for 5 weeks after the A-bomb to blanket San Francisco, San Diego, and LA with plague-infested fleas. Scary to think if they had done that before the A-bomb and their subsequent surrender, how things could have been very different. Story 16. We have trace amounts of iron, gold, nickel, and silver within our bloodstream, which means with enough people, you could drain them of their blood, dilute it down to separate it, and eventually be able to make a full ingot of iron, gold, nickel, and silver. To elaborate on this further, it would take nearly 300 average adult men drained of their blood to have enough iron to forge a longsword. You could literally have a sword forged from the blood of your enemies, as the fantasy novels say, if you have 300 enemies. Story 17. Your eyes have a separate immune system from the rest of your body. Once your body's immune system discovers you have eyes, it will attack and inflame the blood vessels in the back of your eyes. This can lead to your vision decreasing or even going blind. Story 18. About 85% of adult autistics are not in full-time employment, many through prejudice and the fact that traditional interview process is loaded against them. Most employers who take the gamble and make reasonable adjustments find that the benefits to the company far outweigh the negatives. Story 19. I don't know if this counts, but I saw a mare drop, as in killed, a full-grown stallion with a single kick. Like he dropped to the ground, shat himself, and died. The simple fact that a horse can be that accurate and deadly so quickly with such skill disturbed and terrifies me. Like to watch it look like a flick of the back hoof, but the stallion acted like he was shot. He was twice her size and it just didn't matter, cause she sought out the one weak spot like a homing missile. I love horses, but goddamn they can be truly metal sometimes. Don't fuck with horses, especially mares with newborns. Story 20. Unless you get a test, most brain aneurysms will go undetected until it's too late, and once it bursts you have extremely limited time to avoid major damage. I recently had an angiogram to see if I had anything forming since my father had a massive brain aneurysm a couple years ago. Ended up being able to prevent an aneurysm the size of half a golf ball from bursting and putting me down at 22. Story 21. Think about death. Not just the chance it'll happen right away, but the actual implications. It is the cessation of existence. Simply put, it's not even just darkness, but sheer nothingness. You don't get to experience everyone's reactions to your death, and you are not even capable to have any opinion on the situation. Story 22. There is an innumerable amount of things that can go wrong in your development from conception to birth. A great number of them are fatal, yet here we are, typing/reading on Reddit. Tell me that's not a miracle. Story 23. Solitary confinement was first instituted by the Quakers in the 1700s. The idea was that the confined would only have his own thoughts to keep him company, and thus the prisoner would come out of confinement born again and reformed. In actual fact, such prisoners were driven insane by the isolation and frequently killed or mutilated themselves, or became so violently paranoid that they were never able to rejoin society. The tragic irony is that this started as a more humane alternative to the death penalty. Story 24. If a biological trait is common in almost every human, then it evolved for a reason. Almost everybody has the same response to the uncanny valley, or in other words, we are made uncomfortable by things that look almost human, but not quite. This implies humans once had a reason to fear something that looks human, but isn't. Story 25. Double check that you know who you really are. My dad found out at 55 that he was never officially adopted, and thus, what he had thought was his legal name was not. All of his investments, his security clearance for a top military government contractor, his 10 years in the Navy, all of his IDs and records, all under a non-legal name with no legal record of his existence under that name. He had to get a passport under his birth name that he didn't even know about, because it was the only birth certificate the hospital had of him from 1944. Took him almost 3 years to officially/legally change his name to the only name he had used/known for 55 years. I'm 55 years old and I don't even know who I am. My dad. Story 26. The extinction of human life is entirely inevitable. It's not if, it's when, and there is really nothing we can do to stop it. Even scarier, our own extinction is incredibly likely due to our own actions, something no other species has ever done. Story 27. When scientists discovered Kuro, a prion disease from a tribe that eats their dead, they found people from civilized populations can have the gene to protect against it, meaning our ancestors were not only cannibals, but were for several generations. Story 28. Many humans are the perfect height where falling down from a standing position can cause severe brain damage and death from a single fall. There's a reason why a lot of kids and babies can eat shit and get up immediately, but when an adult falls, they stay down. Story 29. Democracy is an illusion. Except for the 1% with fuck you money, we are all slaves to the said 1%. We are a critical point in human history. We are either going to go in the Star Trek or Elysium direction. Story 30. 10% per minute. That's the rate at which your chance of survival decreases when you have cardiac arrest without effective CPR. If you're not in a hospital or with a medical professional, best case scenario, it'll take 2 minutes to recognize what's happened, 3 minutes to call the ambulance, and another 10 minutes or so for them to arrive. This is why everyone needs to learn CPR. Story 31. Chimps don't attack to kill. Instead, they aim for the genitals, face, and fingers. It will leave the opponent alive. There have been many people who have owned chimps who have turned on their owners and left them incredibly disfigured. One case, the chimp ripped a man's junk off. In all cases, faces were mutilated and fingers were chewed off. It's pretty much how they instinctively fight in the wild. So if you think that a chimp is going to be a cute pet, you better think twice. Even if you raised it since it was born, they'll turn on you at any second. A disfigurement roulette waiting to happen. Vile creatures. Story 32. The odds of dying in a car accident are 1 in 107. Not only that you can die in a car only going 40 miles per hour, and something like 30% of the people driving after 10 p.m. are driving drunk. Driving is super dangerous, and most people take it for granted. Story 33. There are about 40 supervolcanoes around the world capable of claiming up to billions of lives, and we're about 24,000 years overdue for an eruption. Story 34. There are an unknowable amount of rogue black holes zipping around the universe, and at any moment, one could pass into our solar system and wipe us out. I don't know what's scarier, that we can't see it coming, or that we can, but utterly helpless to do anything. We can't stop it, we can't outrun it. Story 35. Cardiovascular disease has been the world's #1 killer since the 90s. In the United States alone, there is a 1 in 4 chance someone you know will die of cardiovascular disease due to poor eating habits. We are not only killing the planet, but we are killing ourselves with how we consume. We are the dumbest apex predator on the planet. Story 36. The reason we die, in a really simplistic way, is because of the oxygen we breathe in to live. We're like a fruit. We are ripening more and more as we're exposed to oxygen, and eventually we rot. Antioxidants get talked about a lot by the health and fitness communities because removing some of the damage done by the oxygen in our bodies is adding potential years to our lives. Story 37. There's a spot where your brain is separated from the outside world by a segment of bone as thick as a few stacked paper sheets, like far less than 1 millimeter. Also, that bone segment is located right at the top of your nasal cavity and can be perforated pretty easily with a long enough stick, killing the owner of the brain in a few days from bacterial meningitis. Ever wondered where did ancient Egyptians fish the brains of dead pharaohs out from? Yep. Source: Med School, or as I like to call it, 1001 Ways to Not Become a Serial Killer. Wink. Story 38. Schizophrenia can happen to anyone at any point in their lives without prior warning signs or symptoms. There are some known risk factors, like psychedelic or illicit drug use and genetics, but for the most part, schizophrenia is not very well understood. Story 39. There are incredibly poor Filipinos who are surviving on leftover food from garbage. Pag is a term given to the leftover food, meat picked from garbage and dumps, which is then washed, cooked, and sold to poor communities in Manila, Philippines. Story 40. More than 80% of the ocean has never been mapped, explored, or even seen by humans. And some of you may know that the deeper you dive in the ocean, the creepier it gets. It makes me wonder, what does the other 80% look like? Story 41. We can't stop climate change. Oil, coal, and gas companies can sue governments for lost revenue due to clean energy projects. So if we go 100% renewal, we'll be paying trillions of taxpayer dollars in lost revenue to fossil fuel companies, even when they don't provide any energy anymore. The system is completely rigged. Story 42. You're not really in a room looking at your screen right now. You're inside your brain's conceptual understanding of a room/environment. That is consistently being updated with new information while you inhabit your brain's conceptual understanding of your body. Everything is information.